Welcome to Graduated, where we talk about mindset and money with the goal to help each other level up in life. Today, we are doing a dream sheet, which is a plan to make sure we are being intentional about what we want in life. I'm LaShawn, and I'm speaking with Brian, age 22, entrepreneur in Namibia. Brian, what is going down?
Hello, LaShawn. Everything is going up, not down.
I
I'm
love
doing
it.
fantastic. And how are you doing?
I'm fantastic. A lot of times I'm connecting with people for the first time, and I love that energy of speaking with someone that you don't know. At the same time, it's great to connect with folks who you've interacted with at a different point of their journey to check in and see how things are going. So this is a great conversation, and I'm ready to get into a couple of your questions, and I have some of my own.
All right. From my standpoint, I feel during my journey, it's been hard understanding and deciphering from people I'm learning from and my professors in university, which I just graduated earlier this year in May. It's you have advice coming in from so many different directions. And so sometimes it gets a bit tricky, right? Deciphering what is the advice to follow or what's like the truth that I need to listen to and really think about. And so I just like to hear from you about how you've dealt with navigating the fact that as you become more successful and hitting the goals you have for yourself, you'll get more and more advice and it becomes harder to see which one's the right path because the problems become more difficult to solve intuitively.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great place to kick off. And I'll start with this story. I'm paraphrasing it for time, but there was a conversation that someone asked President Obama about and decision making. And he said, the hard thing about being a president or any type of political leader, an executive at a big company, anyone who is responsible for a set of leadership activities is that by the time a decision gets to his level, excuse me, it's the impossible decision, right? Because if it was easy, someone would have figured that out already. And so I think some of these things that get very complicated as you progress in your career are because there's so many pros and cons to weigh that it can be tricky to really assess the true impact, because the easy decisions are usually where there's not a lot of contention or ambiguity or these things where there are an extensive list of pros and cons. And so I just like to keep that in my mind as I think about these things, that sometimes we're in a place where we have to build the skill set to make the impossible decision. But back to your question, for me, one of the things that I learned, this was fortunate, and so this is not me just pulling this from the ether and figuring this out, but getting advice from different people, is that if you don't factor in the context of the advice that you're getting from someone, then it's unlikely to be super useful for you. And by that, here's a more concrete attribute. There are a lot of people who have a much higher risk profile than others. And I would say I'm probably one of those people. I'm willing to take on a fair amount of risk to get and achieve what I want in life. Other people, not so much. And that's not a good or bad thing. That's just a different propensity to risk. And a great example of this is some of the teachers that I had in school, where I would be speaking to someone, they'd give me advice. And what I didn't know at the time is how to really, I'll call it discounting, but how to factor in their risk assumption in their advice. And so if someone says, hey, Brian, you should do XYZ, and they're doing that through the lens of taking as little risk as possible, if you don't have that same risk profile, then that's horrible advice. And I found time and time again, there was some built-in assumption of some attribute that if I wasn't paying attention to, that advice wasn't going to be applicable. And so for me, that's the big payoff, that I try to listen to a lot of stimuli and then try to figure out how closely aligned is this person's values with mine. And when I do that in an intentional way, that advice tends to be more useful. Even if I decide to do the opposite, because I might look at something and say, I'm going to do the opposite because of what this person is telling me. I always found it, quick side note, quite interesting that there are a lot of professors who are tenured professors who have worked at the same place as employees for years and years at a university or a school, and they're teaching someone entrepreneurship. And that's just weird to me. Now, it doesn't mean that some of those professors are entrepreneurs. They do it outside or they had a history of it before. But many of these folks are teaching a subject that they've never done. And they're actually in the opposite situation where they are, they're very structured. They are very organizationally led in something, or organizations that move very slowly. And so I think factoring in and listening to your own voice that says, does the source of this advice align with my values, I think is really important to think about. The other piece, that I try to pay attention to is, will this advice get me to wherever I'm trying to go? Because again, contextually, people aren't all on the same journey. And I'm trying to ask myself, has my motivation, has my North Star shifted? And if I listen to this advice, does it accrue to that, or does it accrue to someone else's long-term plan? They say that many of us want one of three things: fame, love, or money. Maybe some people want all three. And if you get advice from someone who really is all about fame and you want money, that advice is probably not going to be optimal. And so anyway, the punchline is, I think a lot of how we filter advice is through the lens of context. And we have to be very self-aware about ourselves to be able to apply that filter.
No, I think it's truly amazing that you say that, because I was just also thinking about, let me call it a parallel idea, right? Where it has the same mechanics of what you're just touching on, but it's a kind of totally different idea. And the idea is this idea of upward mobility, right? I listened to a really interesting podcast episode from a show called Hidden Brain. And they were talking about how people from maybe disadvantaged, neighborhoods and stuff, or backgrounds, usually have to do a lot of upward mobility to achieve the success they envision. And as they go along that path, different people from their lives and that they meet either move forward with them or become, unfortunately, obsolete in harsh terms from their lives. And so I feel like now, as you level up in your journey and advice becomes harder to decipher, it's coming from your friends, advice or ideas about how you should go about your life become intentions, right? How have you dealt with the fact that journey just becomes increasingly harder in that sense, and that more connections, friends, families, and people who respected you being broken as a result of, you just needing to move forward, and any connection or interaction with many people in your life is just useless compared to what you want to achieve?
Yeah, I think we'll start with the great notorious B.I.G. And I think what you're saying is more money, more problems. And I say that in a flippant, silly way, but it's true in that there's a different set of challenges that you have to face once you become more successful. And for someone who's just getting started on their financial journey, that's a lot harder, right? Because they're like, easy for you to say you got money. And the way I look at that is very similar to, I think, the progression that some people go on in their professional careers. So for instance, if you are early in career in many professions, I've spent most of my career in knowledge work. So people working on computers and things like that on a desk. So I can't speak for people who maybe work in a factory or outside more physically with their hands. But for people who are knowledge workers, kind of desk workers, one of the things that you'll see is early in your career, you're doing more objective work, some type of task, skill-based work for a function or role. Maybe you're a designer, or you are a software developer, or you're a project manager. And it's those structured skills that you're being paid for. And as you mature in your career, you are becoming more of a people manager or a leader, or someone where the communication and interpersonal part of your job, the soft skills, are really what's the most critical. And there's crossover that happens where you have to, if you really want to exceed and excel as you get further in many of these careers, is you have to stop doing so much of the hard skills. If you're a software developer, for example, you got to stop writing code and you have to be able to build team, hire teams, the other people who are going to be writing code. And it's a very different muscle and skill set. And I think financial literacy and our journey with money is something similar. As we get started, we want to make sure we understand the core skills and capabilities we need. I can rattle off some of the basic financial advice that most people should have. You should save a decent amount of your income. You should not have credit cards. You should max out any type of employee investment programs that you have access to. You should avoid buying individual stocks. You should instead buy, diversified mutual funds or ETFs, exchange traded funds. You should only get advice from professional advisors that are willing to sign. In the US, it's called the fiduciary standard, some type of document that is going to say, I only will give you advice that's in your best interest, not based upon what commissions or other things that I might get. And really be thoughtful about your long-term purchases. Only buy a home when you're ready. Understand the lifetime impact that having children will have on your finances, and do that with intention. Not that it's a bad thing, but do it with intention. Make sure you're hedging and you're purchasing insurance across all sorts of classes, whether it's healthcare, disability, home owners insurance. Like, all of these things are the obvious things that you have to do. But back to your point, once you get beyond that, it's okay. What do I do to preserve the capital that I've made? What do I do to accelerate the investments that I have in flight? I'll give you a real example. Right now in the US, there is a lot of uncertainty about inflation and what that's going to do with asset classes, what that means, and how that will impact the stock market. And I have a decent amount of my wealth in the stock market. And so I've had to decide, all right, is now a good time to move some of this to a different asset class? And if I talk to someone who's thinking like an employee and a worker, the decision, I've had some of these conversations that people put out there. I listen to the advice. I'm like, this is ridiculous advice. This is not useful to me at all, because what I am trying to do is not put together a plan that assumes that I'm working for somebody for the next 30 years. I'm trying to put together a plan that says, how do I have enough capital, not just for me, but for me to invest in other businesses? And the output of that exploration for myself was maximizing my cash flow. And because the cash flow that I generate can be leveraged into other businesses or real estate or other types of asset classes. And so the punchline to your question, I think it's mostly about the self-awareness of where you want to go, and looking at advice from others at best as these anecdotes to points of stories rather than a path you should actually take action on. And it's a lonely kind of approach there, but I don't think that you can be successful and go through kind of decision by committee as you become more financially successful. You have to take a ton of signal and then filter it through the lens of your own self-awareness.
I think that was a brilliant and interestingly balanced response to that question. And I think as I was talking with you, I feel like there's just a natural progression of thoughts here that we're having, which is interesting. Yeah. And I feel like the next progression is taking a look at maybe what some people might call the formula of success, hard work. And now, while we know those are the two ingredients, we don't know the proportions. And so I'm asking you the question that I also, know that is popular on a podcast I really enjoy. And the question is, was it hard work or luck that got you this far in your journey, as far as you are, not to necessarily say that this is the end of your journey or this is the peak of your success, but just to the point that you are, what got you there? Success, hard work, or luck?
Yeah, no, I like that question. And this may be from How I Built This. Is that where you've heard that in the past?
Yes, sir. Loyal listener since 2018.
High five. All right. So I think there's maybe a different way to answer that. And if you think about physics, let's take something like electricity. The way electricity moves through a wire is a combination of two things, wattage and voltage. And you look at the currency of the current rather, of the electricity as how fast is it moving. And the voltage is how big is the unit of energy. And there's something I like about that relationship of what's the size of something and how fast is it moving. That is, to me, more interesting than a simple ratio. But if we go back to luck versus hard work, I think that it's mostly luck, like overly, like it's so much luck, chance, or whatever label is appropriate there. And being born in a certain place is part of luck. For better or worse, there are social inequalities around certain groups, whether it's gender or race or other types of things that can put you in a point of privilege or disadvantage, starting from a disadvantaged starting point. There are just so many different ways to think about how we get lucky for how we show up. And I don't think that's an excuse for us to not fight or to say, of course, they're winning because look where they started. I think ultimately we're only in a race with ourselves. And as long as we can remind ourselves about that, we're not going to be disappointed when somebody else is a billionaire before we are, or somebody else reaches some other level of non-monetary success that we're looking and seeking. And so I look at it as almost everything is luck. And the best thing that we can do is iteratively, and I really mean that, every day, try to show up in a meaningful way to take action on whatever your starting position is. Even if it's a sucky situation where financially you might have issues, you might have relationship issues, you might have health issues, both physical and mental. There's so many things that can put us at a starting point that's way behind where others may start. But if we show up every day saying, how do I chip away at this? I think that's the magic. And the reason that's so important is because it forces us into a habit of action. And when you take that action every day, it's the same thing that happens with money. It compounds. And I have seen that people who build that muscle, they not only can get back to the same starting line that others with more privilege had, but they will blow past that point because they are consistently showing up and investing in themselves in the moment. So even when something negative happens, they know how to course correct and say, I'm going to turn this negative into a positive right now, not in a week or a month, like right now, today. And that to me is really the magic here, if there is such a thing, because it's really a simple formula, but it's hard for us to do. I was talking to someone earlier and we were talking about how to have the best body of your life at a certain season of your life, the solution is simple. It's fitness or exercise and nutrition. Like it's not a complicated formula, but you got to show up every day and commit to that. And I think for our financial journey, there's something similar, that we got to show up every day and not assume that the world's going to give it to us or is going to put us in the right position. In fact, in many cases, it's going to try to take it away from us, not just from bad actors who are trying to suppress our success, but from other people who are living in fear. And this ties back to your earlier question. One of the worst things that I think people do when they're giving advice is they let their fear work into their advice. I had a project, a film that I was working on, and someone went to a friend. I was like, hey, we should put together this team. I think we're in a place where we're ready to actually make a feature film. And everything was like, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if this happens? And while there's a place to identify all your risks, find the mitigation, and make sure you are moving with intention, the idea that you're just looking for all the reasons not to do something will guarantee that you won't get anywhere. And the flip side to that, instead of asking what could go wrong, I'm like, but what if it goes right? And it's not trying to be, you don't want to be naive and just think, I'm just going to go try this thing, it's going to work out. You have to put in the work. You have to have the rigor. You have to have the right hygiene. But moving in fear is guaranteed to put you in a worse position. And so I think a lot of this happens when you consistently show up. You don't look at the world through a lens of scarcity. You look at it through the lens of abundance, and everybody can win, and you fight and chip away every day. And that day will turn into a week, to a month, to a quarter, to a year, to 5 years. And you may have had to invest an extra 2 years to get back to the starting point that someone else had. But that muscle is so well exercised that, back to the electricity, the velocity at which you're moving is so much faster than someone who, just isn't exercising that muscle, that you blow past those expectations. And at that point, that's where we get to those kind of statements where the sky's the limit. And as long as you stick to that, it can keep compounding. And so that gets me excited. And I look at that as the luck part is the piece we can't necessarily control, but the hard work is how we take advantage of whatever situation we will find ourselves in.
It's interesting you spoke about abundance in your response, because I just shared on my WhatsApp status, abundance, nothing but abundance. And yeah, I totally believe that you really need to look at the world from a place of abundance in order to experience it and enable yourself, first of all, to work for it. But as far as my questions, I think that was the end of it for now. There's so many, but need some time to discern which ones to forward to you. So earlier on, you mentioned you have some for me. Maybe now's the time to hear from your side.
Sure. Before we wrap up off that last one, I think one of the things that you hit on that's important, and there's a book called Mind Over Money, and it's not transformative or like amazing must read, but I love those types of books because they provide us with a framework on how to think about our relationship with money. And it has this section about money worshiping disorders. And really at the core, it's saying sometimes because of our childhood or other things of how the environments that we're raised in, whether it's from family or our broader environments, we get these weird dysfunctional relationships with money. And we start taking on behaviors that are going to make that situation worse. And some of the things they call out are hoarding, just physically hoarding things or emotionally hoarding. Another thing is taking unreasonable risk because you feel like you're so behind that you have to get rich quick. Like you got to make the money today or the plan is never going to work out. Another one is rooted in the thinking of the Protestants' work ethic, which is about kind of workaholism. So you're just going to work like the Rihanna song. You're going to keep working because you're like, that's the way I'm going to fix this money issue that I had as a child or what have you. And then another is overspending, compulsive buying, or underspending, where you're so afraid that the money is going to leave that you don't invest it in a wise way. And so you never break out. You're always clipping the coupon instead of figuring out how to make more money. So the savings isn't the critical decision factor. And so I just call all these things out that I think sometimes we have these behaviors that society will not judge us for. If someone's Brian, wow, he really works hard. That's that guy. Like he's fantastic. I'd work with him anytime because he's such a hard worker. There's a societal language that almost rewards that. And there's nothing wrong with working hard. However, we want to understand why are we doing that? And if it's from a place that is driven by a poor relationship with money, I think that's the thing that we have to interrogate within ourselves. And I think that's worth calling out. And then to your question of what did I want to talk to you about or ask you about, I want to hear from you what you think is enough money to live the life that you want to live. How much is enough?
Oh man, what a question. And I think this question definitely is the biggest one that I have to answer. And then I will feel like I know quite a lot about life once I figure that out. Not that I think that's ever possible. It's a feeling you can have nonetheless. But yeah, so I'd say that at this current point, one of the biggest things I've done in my life was start up Africa, which is a social news media company that was all about essentially explaining in the Vox sense and explanatory journalism sense, explaining African news and bringing in a way that brings a lot more empathy towards the matters on the continent and thus, watchdogging effect on anybody who may have bad intentions. So anyway, basically what happened to me was I realized that I couldn't do this financially in a financially sustainable way at that moment in my life, which was nonetheless a great place. I just felt like I had another opportunity, which is a SaaS consulting business that could make me, not, first of all, money, and not just money, but multiples more than I have access to with any other best opportunity. And yeah, I decided to pursue that. And I feel now that I'm pursuing this and it's going as great as I knew it could, and it keeps surprising me how fast I'm growing with the SaaS startups that we consult. But at the end of the day, what stands out for me is eventually I feel like it really all falls into place in a sense. And so I feel like just because of the journey that I walked you through there, it's really a major reason as to why I see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, so I think you're describing a world where you had one approach to how you generate money, and it's an idea for a business that you wanted to grow and impact the world. And you said, hey, if I change my approach here, I can do something that is potentially more sustainable. And then that still over time will give you the capital to go and invest in that original idea if you decide to. So I think that's a smart path. One of the things that I'd like to hear more about as you're thinking through is, how do you see your path to accumulating assets? And when I say an asset, something that pays you money without you working. I talked to a number of people who own businesses that are helping transform their financial position. However, they are owner-operator type businesses that if that owner leaves tomorrow, the business will either fall apart or won't be as successful as it is with that person at the helm, which is different than owning a piece of real estate or some other business that you never have to show up to and money just gets wired into a bank account once a month, once a quarter. And as you think about acquiring the financial success that you want, how do you balance the income that you can make that feels more like an employee, even though you're a business owner, versus the assets that you're accumulating that over time will give you the mobility to do whatever you want with your time, even if you never show up and work in that business?
I think that's a brilliant question. And I think, honestly, because there's so many reasons anyone could list, but to pick out the best of the best, I'll keep my list short to 2 points. I think the first point is you really have to have a mindset of testing a hypothesis the whole time. So it's like, all right, I look at this opportunity, this business opportunity, and I think this is, now that I know that it's this shape and this size and requires this and that, how far can it take me and how quickly, right? Having a mindset to try, okay, let's try and put out an ad here. That doesn't work, switch to another thing. I think that's a mindset that you really need to have. And then again, to my second point, it's also then goes down to finding and working with the best possible people within your existence. Of course, some people you've never met, and maybe they are the ultimately best people for you, but it's not practical to want to think of finding the best person in the world to work with you, but rather the best person in your social network to work with you. And I feel like once you get those there, which I feel like at this point, I have those ingredients pretty well within my life, and I can walk away if I really prepare for it, for 2 weeks for my business, and I know that it will continue running smoothly with almost no interruption. And my goal is to definitely get beyond that by really, soaking those 2 points in of essentially just understanding that it's a process. And at the end of the day, again, like in a very grandiose way, sometimes I feel, although not in the usual sense people think about it, but in a grandiose way, I think things still fall in place, provided that you just keep having that mindset, LaShawn, that you were mentioning earlier, of just hashing at it every day, no matter if it's raining or it's snowing or it's sunny. The mood is something that's there, right? You're human, you experience emotions and different things, but you know how to mentally focus and train your mind on the next task ahead, or finding what the next task ahead is to get to where you want to get to.
Love it. And that's the right approach, I think. One tactical thing that I wanted to share as I was listening to you is this thing I call the three houses approach. And this is just a tactical side note, but sometimes when I am talking to individuals, they're trying to figure out short-term planning, retirement planning, just the time horizon of our financial journey is sometimes in question. And I find that when you think about assets in the context of annuities, these things that just keep paying consistent amounts and very predictable sums, one of the ways that I've figured out how to have a conversation with someone is to do this thing I call three houses. And the purpose of this is the reason it's useful is not because it's 100% accurate, but it translates to a lot of currencies and different life stages very easily. And the premise is, and I just thought I'd share this with you for fodder for your thinking, is that if you owned free and clear, no mortgage, three houses, and you lived in one and you rented out the other two, financially, you would likely be able to, obviously you need shelter, so you're living in the first one. In the second one, the rental income can pay for the maintenance, property tax, and other types of overhead to keep the other all three houses in good shape. And then the third house, the rental income you get from that can be used to travel or invest in yourselves, buy yourself whatever you need to get through life. And that can be a scary number when people look at that, because it sounds like that's going to take a long time to own three houses that I don't have a mortgage on. But if you think about what type of house you want to live in, the reason this is an interesting exercise is, let's say you live in an area where a house costs $50,000. That means that you need three houses at $50,000, $150,000. That gives you a rough estimate on how much money your business needs to either be worth or needs to, be sold for to get to your initial financial kind of major milestone. And if you say, I want to live in a $500,000 US house, now you need $1.5 million. And the number is fairly linear. If you're like, I want a $2 million house, then you need $6 million. If you have a $20,000 house, then you need $60,000. And the reason this math works is most cities, regions, countries are adapted so that housing is a percentage of our other expenses, whether it's groceries or insurance or what have you. And so the reason I like this is the individual gets to pick what the price of the house should be. But from there, all the other math just works itself out. And it's a helpful way to think about annuity math through the lens of our lifestyle that we're looking at. And so for your business, if you say, okay, how much is my business worth? Well, your business is usually going to be worth, some multiple of the free cash flow that it generates every year. And then depending on your industry, it might be a 1 times multiple, a 3 times, a 5 times, a 10 times. These are all ways to value cash flow for a company in a given industry. So for instance, in retail, it might be a 1.5 times multiple. In software, specifically subscription software, in many cases, it's 30 times, which is a crazy number. And sometimes it's not even just the profitability in software, it's the top line gross revenue. But all of this to say, if you get to those numbers, you can figure out, what is my business worth? And am I directionally moving toward kind of the 3-house math? And so the point is not that you have to buy 3 houses, but the point is to use the 3-house formula to figure out what the number of 3 houses would be for your particular scenario. And that gives you a starting point on how much money you may want to try to target to get to your first true financial freedom milestone, where you don't have to work. You don't have to do anything to continue to satisfy your lifestyle. And if you've done the work to go get to that point, you're going to blow past that milestone because you're going to be exercising every day and you're going to keep showing up. And you might end up at 5, 10, 30 houses of equivalent value. But anyway, I thought I'd share that because as you're talking about how you start to build and grow your business, I think it's helpful to say, all right, how much should this business be worth in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years? And having a real number that you can calculate can be a helpful milestone. So you're optimizing in a way that gets you to a place that really unlocks your freedom, at least financially.
I think that's such an interesting and a new idea from the things I've been hearing around viewing any economic endeavor that you take on in your life. And I feel like on my end, yeah, with the business I started, we basically help SaaS startups explain how their products work. And that's true. That really just means helping them teach their users how to use their product, how to troubleshoot it and stuff like that. And of course, as SaaS, there's SaaS products appearing everywhere from around the world. Anybody now can build something and charge enterprise clients from their bedroom a certain subscription fee. So I think there's tremendous growth there in terms of just being a consulting service yet, and then later becoming technology enabled by potentially building a software that replaces most of the human-powered consulting work that we do for clients. So I think there's a strong business there, and if not me pursuing this business, making me a very valuable employee, right? For startups or tech companies that sort of exist around the realm of this business that I'm operating. So yeah, the reason why I'm describing the prospect of success there and how I view it is to say that for me, that's really a high ticket in terms of economic and value. It's a high ticket idea that I think should I dedicate the next 1-2 years of not working more than 6 hours a day, which is a pretty good deal anyway, of working the next 1-2 years, just focused on this business, I think I could really set myself up majorly to honestly not worry about money, but just exploring the world as it nakedly is. And of course, that would be me returning to African news or global news per se. But I just think that like Elon Musk and his different projects and Bill Gates with his foundation, my destiny or the thing I really want to do is essentially prepare the news industry, which I think is one of the industries in the whole world that are lagging behind the most. The news industry needs to catch up to explaining the world in the right way to the very evolved audience that exists today in the world. And that's just not a problem because I'm an entrepreneur looking for money, but I think it's a really big danger to the existence of the human race to have an industry that tells us what's happening, what to fear, what not to fear, be really obsolete in the way it's operating and not evolving and adopting new technologies in new ways. And I hope, I think on paper, the plan sounds great. As you said, with luck, it's everywhere. And I'm just really hoping now that the stars align and keep channeling opportunities to me at an all right cadence. And then again, beyond that I remain with that really diligent and laser focus as I move through and also try to enjoy life in some kind of like more reckless ways than this seemingly well put together idea I just shared.
I think you got the right mindset. And as you're talking to other folks, including myself, I think it's helpful to back to my earlier point that I got to listen to people through the lens of their values. And so I think you got a great plan. Even for me, I was telling you about the 3-house plan. I value freedom. I like the idea that we can be truly independent financially from the system. We don't have to show up anywhere to do work. Doesn't mean we don't work. It means we probably want to work more, but you get to work on the things you really care about. But you can do those things in a way that other folks can't control you. And that idea of financial freedom through that lens is really what drives me. For you or others, that may not be the thing. And so I think one of the best pieces of advice is don't listen to people too directly and always discount from their position. But it sounds like you're in the right place. And big shout out for congrats on school, finishing earlier this year, the business, and the general mindset that you're bringing to your future. So I think you're going to be great. And I don't know that it has to be reckless. Come on, you just got to enjoy yourself and find that balance of today versus tomorrow.
Right, no, the great point about the recklessness there. But yeah, I think there's a beauty to the maybe flaws is not the best word, but let me say it anyway. The flaws and randomness and errors in the world too. That I think if you don't know and indulge in them, it's missing out on some part of the human experience too.
No, I agree. Here's to you finding the right moments there to enjoy. And I think you're picking a problem in the world, how we view the world, and how media can be an unlock to help us both better understand the world, our place in it, and how to interact with each other is very. Last question for you before I let you go. This is a question that I ask everyone in the context of this show. Imagine you are at a celebration for your 70th birthday, 70, and the room has gotten quiet, and like when you have the big party and the glasses are clanging and they're like, wait, hold up, speech, Brian, we want a speech. And someone asks you at your 70th birthday party to share what you're most proud of accomplishing or experiencing in life up to that point. What do you hope you'll be able to say?
Oh, I guess I grabbed the mic with that team breathing that you just experienced now. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, what I'll say such an occasion is that I am really mostly very proud of myself. Proud of myself because not of loving myself or in any regard, but rather proud of myself for recognizing the service I have to everything around me and that I care for, from my family to causes that resonate with my personal journey throughout life. So yes, that duty and respect towards serving that duty of reciprocating love, it exists, and it's those are people who are in your life and need to be respected. But I feel like at the end of the day, it's up to you to pick up that duty and to hold it. And I really grabbed it. I grabbed it up with that responsibility, and I used it to enable and motivate myself. Really, no matter what weather and the people are saying, go for what I believe in and trust and know that it's never a problem or a problem I cannot see and resolve on my path to that point if I just maintain that mindset. As to all those that, here and that cared, it was my honor serving you. It was my honor serving what I believed was also the greatest problem ahead of us as a human race. And other than that, I really did what I could with this great chance of life.
Wow. And at that point, everyone would be clapping. And here for our show today, I think that's a great place for us to applaud you and really appreciate you in hanging out, having this conversation. And this was fun. I just love talking to thoughtful people who have the right mindset and have the time in front of them to really execute against that mindset. So I'm super excited about where you will head next. And I want you to finish the year strong and have an amazing 2022.
Thank you so much, LaShawn. I am incredibly excited to get to the end of this year. I am taking a pretty decent trip to Thailand, visiting a friend of mine, and yeah, just can't wait to see a different scenery after a long time in my room and house, just grinding away over the last sort of year and a half or almost 2 years now. So yeah, excited to taste of that freedom we've been talking about throughout the talk today, that independence, and see what more comes from it in my focus and what I want from the world.
Love it. Enjoy the trip. Travel safe. Bring some new ideas back. Brian.
Right. Talk soon. Thank you, LaShawn.